It still echoes in my mind, the day my daughter-in-law looked straight into my eyes and said she didn't want this useless old woman in her house anymore. Her words cut deeper than any knife. "You're a burden," she said coldly, "too slow, too fragile, too poor to matter." I remember standing there in the hallway, clutching a small suitcase that wasn't even mine. My son, Daniel, stood behind her, silent, eyes glued to the floor. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look at me. That night, I sat on the porch with the rain pouring down, listening to the wind rattle the door that had just been locked behind me. My bones ached from the cold, but what hurt most was realizing that I no longer had a home in the place I had built with love. And yet, the very next morning, there was a knock on that same door. A gentle, careful knock that would change everything, the way they saw me, and the way I saw myself. But before I tell you what happened next, let me take you back to where it all began. Hi everyone, this is Margaret. Today, I want to share a story that still trembles in my heart, a story about pain, strength, and the day I decided to stop being silent. If you're watching this, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us share more stories that remind people of the power of faith and resilience. And tell me in the comments, where are you from? Maybe you've lived through something like this. If you have a story of your own, share it. You never know who might find hope in your words. It was late afternoon when the clouds turned grey. My little house smelled of rain and cinnamon, the way it always did when I brewed tea. My grandson, Ethan, sat beside me, his small hands wrapped around a warm mug, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Grandma," he asked softly, "why don't you ever go to Dad's house anymore?" His question froze my hands midair. The spoon clinked against the cup, and for a moment, I just stared out the window at the old oak tree swaying in the wind. That tree had seen everything, every joy, every heartbreak, every goodbye. I took a deep breath. "Because, sweetheart," I said, "sometimes the people you love forget how to love you back." He looked confused, but that innocent face reminded me why I had to tell the truth. "Years ago, before you were born, Ethan," I began, "I used to live in that same house, the one your father owns now. I raised him there. I planted those roses by the porch, painted every wall, and stayed awake through every storm to keep him safe." My voice trembled slightly as the memories poured back. "But life doesn't stay the same. Your grandfather passed away, and after that, the silence in the house grew too heavy. Daniel had already married your mother, Laura. She was beautiful, smart, and for a while, I thought she loved me like a mother too. But I was wrong. Laura was kind when Daniel was around, but the moment he left for work, her smile disappeared. I could feel her resentment in every word she didn't say. She would sigh when I cooked, correct me when I cleaned, and once, I overheard her whisper on the phone, "Why can't she just move out already?" I tried to ignore it. I told myself maybe she was just tired, or maybe I was too sensitive. But one evening, she dropped the plate and blamed me. When Daniel came home, she cried, saying I made her life difficult. My son, my only son, looked at me with frustration and said, "Mom, please, we are trying to build our own life here. Maybe you should go stay somewhere else for a while." Those words broke something inside me. I had spent my whole life taking care of that house and of him, and suddenly, I was the outsider. That night, I quietly packed a few clothes, an old photograph of your grandfather, and one more thing, the deed papers I'd kept hidden away for years. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew, someday, truth finds its way home. I left the house and slept under the stars for the first time in decades. The night was cold, but strangely peaceful. There was no roof above me, no family around me, but there was silence, and in that silence, I found a piece of strength I didn't know I still had. Just as the first light of dawn touched my face, I heard it, 3 soft knocks on my door. When I opened it, a man stood there, a tall figure in a grey hat, holding a small envelope. "Are you Mrs. Margaret Lewis?" he asked. I nodded, unsure. He handed me the envelope and said, "Ma'am, this might change your life." Then he turned and walked away. My heart pounded as I held that envelope in my shaking hands. Inside, I found something I never expected, something that would change not just my life, but the lives of everyone who once turned their backs on me. But that's a story for another night. Because what was written in that letter would shock everyone. When I first held that envelope, my hands were trembling so badly I could hardly open it. The paper felt heavier than it should have been, as if it carried not just ink and words, but years of buried truth. I sat down by the window, the morning sun slowly pushing its light through the curtains, and with a deep breath, I tore it open. Inside was a neatly folded document and a short handwritten note. The handwriting was unfamiliar, strong, steady, maybe belonging to a lawyer or an official. I started reading, my eyes scanning each word carefully. "Dear Mrs. Lewis," it began, "this letter is to confirm that the ownership of the property located at 219 Willow Street remains legally under your name, as per the last amendment filed by your late husband, Mr. Richard Lewis." I froze. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That address, it was my son's house. The house they had told me to leave. The house I'd built with my own hands. It was still mine. The note continued. Mr. Lewis had ensured that, in the event of his passing, the property could not be transferred without your written consent. We recommend visiting our office to renew the ownership verification, as the record remains active. I just sat there, staring at the letter. I felt a rush of emotions, disbelief, relief, sorrow, and something I hadn't felt in years, quiet power. I remembered that day, so many years ago, when my husband and I had gone to sign the papers. He had held my hand and said, "Maggie, promise me you'll never let anyone take away what we built together." For the first time in a long time, I felt him near me. I knew this wasn't just a piece of paper. It was justice. But more than that, it was a reminder that I wasn't as powerless as they made me feel. Still, I didn't rush. I didn't storm into their house or shout in the street. No, sometimes strength means waiting in silence until the right moment comes. That evening, I made myself another cup of tea and sat by the porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. The letter rested on the table beside me. Every time the wind blew, it fluttered a little, like it was alive, reminding me that the story wasn't over yet. Days passed, and word began to spread through the small town that I was living alone again. Some neighbors came by with casseroles, some just to gossip. A few kind souls offered help, but I smiled and said I was fine. Deep down, I was planning my next move. A week later, I dressed in my best blue coat, the one your grandfather loved, and took the bus to the city. My knees ached, but I didn't care. I walked into the lawyer's office, handed him the letter, and said, "I want to make sure my husband's will is respected." The lawyer looked at the documents carefully, nodded, and smiled. "Mrs. Lewis, everything checks out. The property is fully yours. You can choose what happens to it now." I thanked him quietly. My voice barely came out. But inside, my heart was shouting. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't forgotten. I was the rightful owner of everything they had built their lives on. On my way home, I sat by the window on the bus, watching the streets blur by, and I thought of Daniel. I remembered his first steps, his laughter, the way he used to run into my arms after school. That little boy still lived inside the man who broke my heart. And as angry as I wanted to be, I couldn't hate him. I just wanted him to remember where he came from. A few days later, there was another knock on my door. This time, it was Daniel. He stood there awkwardly, his eyes red, holding a bag of groceries. "Mom," he said softly, "Laura and we've been talking. We shouldn't have treated you that way." I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the guilt swimming in his eyes. He continued, "We want you to come back home. The house feels empty without you." I smiled faintly and asked, "My home?" He nodded. "Yes, your home." I invited him inside, made tea like I used to, and we sat quietly for a while. He didn't know about the letter, and I didn't mention it, not yet. Sometimes, silence can say more than words. When he left that evening, he hugged me tightly, something he hadn't done in years. "I'll come tomorrow to take you home," he said. But as the door closed behind him, I looked at the letter again lying on my table. The edges were slightly curved now, but the power it held hadn't faded. I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, yes, but not in the way you think." Because I knew what I had to do next. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain started again, tapping gently against the window. I sat in my rocking chair, holding the letter, and thought about everything I had lost, and everything I had regained. I realized this wasn't just about property or pride, it was about dignity. About showing them that even when they called me useless, I still had worth. The next morning, I put on my coat again and walked back to the lawyer's office. "I'd like to transfer the house," I told him. He looked surprised. "To whom?" he asked. I smiled softly. "To my grandson. To Ethan." He nodded respectfully and began preparing the papers. That was the moment. "Ethan, when I decided, the legacy your grandfather and I built would not be lost to pride or pain. It would belong to the only person who still looked at me with love in his eyes. And that, my dear, was the day I stopped being the old woman they called a burden, and became the woman who carried her family's name with quiet strength. But this story isn't over yet. Because when your father found out what I had done, his reaction was something I'll never forget. The next morning, the sky was calm, no thunder, no rain, just white sunlight spilling through the curtains like a soft promise. I sat on the porch, rocking slowly in my chair, when I heard footsteps crunching the gravel. Daniel was back. He looked different that day, a little nervous, maybe even humbled. He smiled gently and said, "Mom, are you ready to come home?" I nodded, but there was a calmness in me now that he didn't recognize. I picked up the envelope that had changed everything and slipped it into my purse. "Yes, Daniel," I said softly. "I'm ready." The drive back to the house was silent. The streets looked the same, but everything inside me had changed. That home, the one they once asked me to leave, didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a test I had finally passed. When we reached the front gate, Laura was waiting outside. She smiled nervously, trying too hard. "Welcome home, Mom," she said, her voice soft, almost careful. I returned her smile, though my heart carried years of ache. "Thank you, dear," I whispered, stepping into the house I had built with my own hands. Every corner whispered memories, The smell of fresh paint, the creak of the wooden floor, the laughter of a young boy who once called me his whole world. We all sat in the living room, Daniel, Laura, and me. The silence between us was heavy, like something sacred and fragile. I could tell Daniel was searching for words, maybe an apology, maybe an explanation. But before he could speak, I reached into my purse and placed the letter on the table. He frowned. "What's that?" I looked at him, the boy I once held, the man who forgot. "It's the truth," I said quietly. "Your father made sure this house would always belong to me. All these years, I kept the papers hidden, not to hold power, but to keep a promise he made before he died. I never told you because I wanted you to earn your life, not inherit it." Laura's eyes widened. Daniel just stared at the letter as if it was something alive. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" "Because," I said softly, "you needed to learn the difference between having a home and owning one." Tears filled his eyes. He leaned back, covering his face with his hands, and for the first time, I saw not anger or pride, but regret. Real, painful regret. Laura looked down, silent. She whispered, "We were wrong, Mom." "I was wrong. You didn't deserve what we did." I nodded slowly, feeling the sting of tears but not anger. "You know," I said, "for a long time, I wanted to be angry. But anger is heavy. And I'm too old to carry heavy things anymore." The room fell quiet. I could hear the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the same one my husband used to wind every night before bed. Then I said the words that surprised even me. "I've already transferred this house." Daniel looked up sharply. "Transferred? To who?" I smiled and turned toward the doorway, where you were standing, Ethan, your little backpack slung over your shoulder, eyes wide, confused but listening. "To him," I said softly. "To my grandson." Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came out. I could see a mix of shock and realization spreading across his face. "Mom, you gave him the house." "Yes," I said. "Because this home doesn't need more owners. It needs someone who remembers love." For a moment, no one moved. The air itself felt still. Then Daniel stood up and came closer. His voice trembled. "Mom, I don't deserve your forgiveness." I reached out, taking his hand in mine, the same hand that once held mine when he was a child crossing the street. "You don't need to deserve it," I whispered. "You just need to learn from it." He knelt beside me and began to cry, quiet, broken sobs that only a son who has found his mother again can cry. Laura joined him, her head bowed, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. I pulled them both close. "This family doesn't need more guilt," I said. "It needs healing. I can't take back what happened, but I can make sure our story doesn't end with bitterness." That evening, the three of us sat outside watching the sun disappear behind the trees. No one spoke much, but something had shifted. Daniel reached over and refilled my teacup, just like I used to do for him when he was a boy. Laura placed a blanket on my lap. Small gestures, but they meant everything. When the stars came out, Ethan curled up beside me and whispered, "Grandma, are you happy now?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. Not because I proved them wrong, but because I proved to myself that kindness is stronger than pride." He nodded sleepily and leaned against me. The crickets sang in the distance, and the wind carried the smell of roses from the porch, the same roses I planted decades ago. As I watched my family sitting together under that quiet sky, I realized something simple yet powerful. Life will test you, people will break you, but what truly defines you is how you rise without losing your softness. Before I end this story, I want to tell everyone watching, if you've ever been called a burden, remember this: your worth isn't measured by what you can give others. It's measured by the love and strength that live inside you. Even when the world forgets you, God never does. So, don't let bitterness harden your heart. Let your pain become wisdom. Let your story remind someone that they, too, can stand again. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and tell me in the comments, have you ever felt underestimated but found your strength again? I'd love to read your story. Because sometimes, the quietest hearts carry the loudest victories.